Welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover podcast presented by the Field of 68. With our apparel partner now, J&J Apparel. As you can see, I think we're all wearing the J&J Apparel. We'll be wearing their apparel for, I guess, the lifetime of the podcast. But I think we're going to start out today, Joey and Charles, with a previously recorded interview that we had with Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated. He also does work for the Field of 68. He hosts a bracketology show, as well as sometimes once or twice a week joins the Field of 68 After Dark, basically the main show on the Field of 68. So we're going to start with that, and then we'll pick up with the Texas A&M review and the preview of the Florida and Kentucky game. We are joined with Kevin Sweeney. He's a college basketball reporter for SI. Additionally, he does Field of 68 podcast, as well as sometimes occasionally joins the Field of 68 After Dark. How are you doing today, Kevin?
Doing good, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm so happy you could join us. So obviously with the kind of success that Alabama's had this season, was that kind of expected coming into the season with the turnover, as far as the staff turnover, and then additionally the loss of obviously like Brandon Miller, Noah Clowney, Charles Bediako, and as well as the other guys at the transfer portal?
Yeah, I was probably down on Alabama relative to consensus. I don't remember if they were like top 25 preseason. I didn't have them there. I had them like, 5 to 7 in the SEC. I kind of felt like they were kind of in that same range as like Florida. And those teams look like all those teams, Auburn, like all those teams have wound up pretty good. And maybe some of the teams you projected at the top have kind of come back to the pack a little bit, but the league's been really good. But I just think Nate has done a phenomenal job to put them where they are, given all the turnover. I mean, look, everyone will talk about staff changes, and that's a huge deal, probably overlooked by a lot of people nationally in terms of its impact. Just it's so hard. I talk to so many coaches just day to day. Like, I mean, it's hard enough to build culture with players, another to build culture inside of the staff, and then to have those guys be the right people to deliver that message to the players. I mean, it's incredibly challenging. And then you add all the roster turnover and some of the late stuff too, right? I mean, obviously, look, I think they knew that you're going to lose Brandon Miller, you're probably going to lose Clowney, but to lose Bediako late and really have to scramble and not only find guys that could fill roles, but also sort of redefine their identity as a team. I just think it says everything about who Nate Oates is as a coach, and I think it's a tremendous credit to him because I think there's so many guys who are so rigid in their ways. And so, look, I think Nate understands how he wants to play. I think he's very convicted in those things, but I also think he's flexible and able to adapt to what he has in front of him. And I don't think this roster was maybe the ideal roster for him from a size standpoint in particular, but has certainly made it work and built a pretty monster team that has a chance to go deep in March. So all in all, they've certainly exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, and you kind of talk about you brought up the ability to adapt. I mean, even in the middle of the season, he switched how the coaching staff was going to run the sides of the ball. Starting out in the season, you had Ryan Pannone running the defense, you had Clonch running the offense, and now you have a mixture of like Clonch and Preston Murphy running the defense, and Oates and Pannone running the offense, with Oates also having a hand on the defense. I think that type of adaptability is something that kind of goes overlooked with regards to Nate Oates. Looking at obviously bringing in elite level talent with the recruiting class they have coming in next year, but just to be able to, I personally think that this is at Nate Oates' best coaching job he's had at Alabama.
I would endorse that. Yeah, look, I think they got punched in the mouth a little bit early. They weren't happy with where they were, and they made the changes. Like, I think for one, like the humility to not be stuck in your ways if things aren't working, I think is something that a lot of coaches honestly don't have. I think it's a problem for a lot of places across America is, all right, like, what do we do now? Right. Like, how do we like, I think there are certain guys who they know the way they want to do things, and that's it. Right. And so for Nate to say, look, like we have to change who we are, how we operate, it's more, I'm not demoting anyone, I'm not firing anyone. I'm just like we need fresh sets of eyes on things, and we will work hell or high water to get this thing turned. Like that to me is a tremendous credit to him. I also think, again, I mean, they played such a difficult non-conference schedule, and that's not something that's easy to deal with, especially when you're considering where they were going to be from a personnel standpoint. I mean, look, like you look at Arizona and bringing back a Umar Ballo and bringing back a Kylan Boswell, or bringing Creighton obviously bringing back Kalkbrenner, and Purdue bringing back Edie and Braden Smith, and Clemson bringing back PJ Hall. Like they ran at the teams that were just a lot more experienced than they were. Even some of the bye games were really tough games. Obviously, you don't think you expected Indiana State to be this good, but like they really challenged themselves, learned I think a lot from that. I think it's a great example for teams. Like, hey, like it's not the worst thing in the world to go get your teeth kicked in once or twice and learn from it. Like Alabama's not going to get destroyed from a seeding standpoint because it didn't beat Ohio State on November 24th. I think all those games taught them something. It forced them to reckon with some of the issues that they were having earlier. And because of that, they were able to make the necessary adjustments and contend for an SEC championship.
And Joey, you had some questions about bracketology if you wanted to go ahead with that.
Oh yeah, it's the same questions that Charles was asking earlier. Let me pull them up really quick so I have them handy. It's the ones that Christian, we were talking about it before we recorded the podcast. Talking about bracketology, obviously, we still have some conference tournaments, still some conference play left, but heading into the tournament in just a little bit over a month here, what are teams that will be seeded between 1 and 5, or at least that you think will be seeded between 1 and 5 that Alabama would probably want to see in their region? I know it's really early, but it's never too early to talk some bracketology.
Yeah, look, I think it's hard because I think there's like at some point you're gonna have to beat really good teams, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a luck of the draw thing, right? Like no one expected FAU to get gifted FDU in the second round, right? Like that's just the way things work. Look, I think if you're Alabama, given that you've played a lot of these teams, right? You've played Tennessee, you've played Arizona, you've played Purdue, like you understand what some of those matchups look like. And I think I'd probably want to avoid those teams if I can, just because each of them individually caused issues. I think Arizona's probably the one I would say I would want to see the most, which is weird to say because Arizona maybe played up the best of that group. I guess Tennessee was really good, but point being, I think if I was picking a 1 seed, I'd probably pick Arizona though, just from a standpoint of I just think stylistically Alabama matches up the best. They can play that style of game with Arizona. I think look, as you work your way down, like I think I'd like to see Baylor because Baylor doesn't really defend. And I think Alabama could really cause some issues for Baylor defensively with the just overall firepower that they have. I think Duke is another team that like I wouldn't be afraid of if I'm Alabama and I got them on got them in an Elite 8 or a Sweet 16 game. Like obviously they're really good, and Filipowski's been unbelievable and be a problem for Bama size. But I think it's less about, oh man, like I don't want to play the team that has a 7-footer. I mean, obviously Edie is Edie, but like beyond him, like I think I'm more hunting for where can I get our advantages if I'm Alabama. And to me, that's like who can I dictate the pace of the game onto? Who can I spread out and put in ball screens and make uncomfortable in space? And so I think teams that maybe play a more traditional style and a little less switchable would be the types of teams that I would want to play.
A couple of years ago, in 2021, Alabama had a lot of momentum heading into the tournament. That was, of course, the tournament that was held in Indianapolis. They'd clinched the regular season SEC title. They had also just won the tournament in Nashville. Went into their bracket, and then, of course, got beat by a play-in team in UCLA. I think that was the Sweet 16. So, we've seen Alabama be able to get toppled by teams that are obviously higher seeded than them, but also lower seeded. We saw it last year with San Diego State. Who do with that in mind, what are some teams that could be seated between 11 and 14, some dark horses that Alabama probably wouldn't stack up well against, that Alabama probably wouldn't want to have in their region?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're always reticent of playing against a team that's super talented that is turning it on at the right time, right? So UCLA in 21 was a good example of that. And that year was so strange with COVID and everything. But like that team had pros. That team had Johnny Juzang and Jaime Jaquez. Like that team, when you look back, you're like, that was not a 12 seed. That was not an 11 seed, whatever they wound up on the seed list. So I think you'd be similarly scared of that if like Gonzaga is an 11 seed, right? Obviously, there's some history there, and Gonzaga, I think, would have issues defending Alabama, but like, would I rather play Gonzaga or Boise State? I'm choosing Boise State, right? Like that's no knock on Boise, it's just talent level wise. Like I think that's the type of thing that would scare me. I'd also be scared of a team that just comes in riding hot, right? So South Florida would be a team that, would be an example of one of those, right? Like their resume has been tanked by the fact that they lost, several games early in the year, lost to Maine, like really struggled. But a similar situation in Alabama in that they really had to figure things out on the fly and learn, in this case, first year head coach Amir Abdur-Rahim did a phenomenal job. And that team's playing like a team that can make noise, but they're probably a 12 or a 13 seed. So if you had to play them in a second round game, maybe you get a 4 seed if you're Alabama, they get they pick off a 5 seed. That's a scary game just because I think they've won something like 16 or 17. So I think that those are the types of teams that scare me. Like obviously, like physically, I'm okay playing a lower conference opponent. Like if I'm Alabama, right? Like obviously, like McNeese is super talented, or something like that. Even Sanford, obviously Bucky's done a phenomenal job. But I think I'd much rather play them than I would have to play a team that has true kind of high major size and length. I think that would be the thing that could concern me, especially if they can switch and match me up defensively if I'm Alabama.
It's funny. There's some history there between Bucky and Alabama, so it's I don't want to see them because it might get a little crazy on Twitter for Alabama fans. So going away from a little bit of the bracketology for the rest of the season, Alabama's got 6 games left. I think the next 4 games for Alabama are against ranked opponents. How do you think Alabama fares, going through the next 6 games as far as like their SEC championship hopes?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is the time for them to prove it, right? Like, I think if you were to pinpoint a question mark with this Alabama team, it's like, how good are they against elite competition, right? Especially when they go away from home. And we've seen them be able to overwhelm teams that they're better than. And when you're better than A&M, like they were on Saturday, like watch out, it gets scary quickly, right? But like I think when they play teams that can match them talent wise, they've caused a lot of problems. And I think that's the thing we'll learn about this group over the next several games. I think starting with Florida. Florida's a really good team. Their point guard play from Zion Pullen's been outstanding. They play 2 bigs. It's a very unique style. Play high-low. Like to me, like that's an awesome coaching chess match type game because on Todd Golden's side, they're gonna try to post up Alabama and they're gonna try to get high lows. And they're gonna try to like pound the ball inside, dominate the offensive glass, but they also have the size and the speed to play up and down. Whereas maybe someone like Purdue, you didn't want to. It was more traditional. Like Florida's more modern, I guess, in the way that they play. So I mean, I'm interested to see that. I'm interested to see Kentucky, a team that probably is one of the few that has the firepower offensively to match Alabama. All right, like how does that look? Like, are we playing 110 to 100? Like what does that entail? And then obviously a rematch with Tennessee. Like, can they get stops and can they be tough? Can they match when they face a team that wants to punch you in the mouth like Tennessee does? Can they match that in a high level game, right? And you would hope at least on their home court that they can. But if they can, it'll tell us a lot about their team moving forward.
And then last question that I think we have is every Alabama fan has been freaking out about this. There because with the most likely like the Louisville job coming open, obviously the Ohio State job coming open, maybe like a Michigan or other high level, because Alabama's not they're a good basketball school, but they're not Louisville, they're not Ohio State, they're not Michigan. My thoughts are Nate Oates has a $12 million buyout this year for a reason. What are your thoughts on Nate Oates potentially making a move or maybe contract extension talks or anything like that?
Look, I'm never going to rule out that he could move down the line at some point. Like, I think if the right massive job opened, I think Michigan State has certainly been speculated about. Dare I say Kentucky at some point, like down the line. Like there are certain jobs that are very, very hard to say no to regardless. But I think Nate Oates is happy at Alabama. I've never heard anything to indicate otherwise. I'll also say this on the buyout front. You said $12 million buyout. Something worth noting for people. A lot of times I think people hear these buyout numbers and they hear them tied to, okay, what happens if we fire the coach? And those buyouts, and you say, Ohio State just paid $15 million to buy out Chris Holtmann. Why wouldn't they spend $12 million to buy out Nate Oates? Those numbers are very, very different. When you're buying out a coach who's being fired, that number is usually not as big as it appears because of offset clauses. So the way that works, right? So Chris Holtmann gets fired at Ohio State February 15th. He turns around March 15th. He becomes the head coach at DePaul. He's making $2 million a year at DePaul. All right, well, the $3.5 million he was being paid annually for the next 4 years from Ohio State drops to $1.5 million. The buyout's now $6 million instead of 15, right? That number is likely to drop. They're not going to pay Chris Holtmann $15 million. They're probably not going to pay him 10. Whereas with Nate Oates, like if you want to go get Nate Oates, if you're Ohio State, you got to pay 10 million, and you got to pay him now. Like you can't pay 10 million, over the course of 4 years. You can't pay 10 million like paced out and hope that it change. Like that money is that money, and it's really hard to do. It would be unprecedented in college basketball, certainly, and even really in college football. There's very few examples of 8-figure buyouts being paid to get a coach out of their contract. So I would not be sitting here worried that Alabama is going to lose Nate Oates to another school this spring. Look, end of the day, is there more that can be done for Nate at Alabama to keep him happy and make sure that this is never a concern? I'm sure, yes. Whether it's contract extension, whether it's more NIL, whether it's facilities, whether it's whatever commitment thing across the board you can do, that's great. Like that should be done. I think, certainly if he can finish a third SEC title in 4 years, but even if he can't, like I'd be all in if I'm Greg Byrne of like, all right, like give this guy whatever he wants because he's proven he can be a championship level coach for Alabama. But I would not also be up at night fearing the day that I wake up to a Goodman tweet that like he's off to Ohio State. Like I just don't think that's a realistic option at the moment.
So are we getting a Kevin Sweeney build the arena quote? Is that
Yeah,
what
I don't know all the details, but if Nate Oates wants an arena, give that man an arena.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, Kevin, tell people where they can find you, what you're working on.
Yeah, a lot of stuff over at Sports Illustrated still. We're humming along. SI.com. May actually have something pretty cool on Alabama coming soon. So keep your eyes peeled if you're a Crimson Tide fan. In the meantime, also over at Field of 68, I'm on After Dark, once or twice a week. Also on Fielding the 68, our bracketology show, if you're interested in that sort of thing. So lots of good stuff. Obviously, March is a busy time, or February still, but headed there. And hopefully you'll follow along the journey. Appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Again, we want to appreciate Kevin for joining the Crimson Crossover podcast. First of many guests that we hope to have on the show. So guys, let's talk about it. I mean, Alabama gets a 25-point win versus Texas A&M team that had previously beaten I think Tennessee by, I don't know, what was like 20 plus points. How did you guys feel about this game on Saturday?
I think this is a Texas A&M team that's really they're kind of like Alabama, and they really struggled early, but they've really climbed and gotten better as the season gone on. Obviously, there were a lot of expectations on this team after, of course, going to the SEC tournament championship game last year. So a lot of people thought this team was going to be really good, which they are really good, but it took them a while to really see those gears start turning. So if this game had happened at the very beginning of SEC play, it probably happened like you would expect. But with this game happening late and with Texas A&M really finding their groove, like you mentioned the Tennessee game, this victory is actually really impressive for Alabama. Obviously, the offense was on point. Incredible atmosphere on top of that, it was the retro night. But going back to the game, just really like the shooting, really like the effort we saw on defense. Texas A&M is obviously one of the best rebounding teams in the league, and even then they still out-rebounded Alabama 49-38. But when you're out-rebounded like that, but still have the offensive efficiency that Alabama had, like they did on Saturday, there's not a lot of things to point at that went wrong for Alabama. Obviously, their 8th 100-point win of the 100-point game of the year, so only one shy of Kentucky now, and still potentially some opportunities for them to tie that record in these coming weeks. I know we'll talk about Kentucky here in a bit, but just overall individual performances. We always talk about Mark Sears every week. Once again, 23 points. He had 4 rebounds. Really liked what I saw from both Griffin and Latrell Wrightsell with their 17 and 16 points. Also with Wrightsell getting 3 rebounds on the day. Sam Walters with his 11 points. He had a really good day as well. I think he might have been kind of the unsung hero just because it seemed like whenever the offense started to have a little bit of a lull. Walters was there to kind of re-electrify the bench and the team. So overall, just from top to bottom, a really good game for Alabama, and it came at a really good time. They had that off week, and of course they had the LSU win before that. But then with this win as well, you kind of like the momentum that they're kind of building into what is going to be two really big games this week.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal atmosphere, obviously, with Retro Day. That got a lot of people excited. Then you start thinking about all the celebrities that were there. Coach Saban, Herb Jones, Noah Clowney. I'm going to give a shout out to Noah Gurley, who was also in attendance. Darian Reed was there as well. And of course, Christian Sykes making his return to Tuscaloosa. So, with everything that was going on before the ball even tipped off, and then also knowing what A&M was coming off of with their loss at Vanderbilt, which was obviously a tough game for them, and losing on a buzzer beater, where would our team's mind have been? Now, again, you didn't have a midweek game. You'd practiced really hard. You'd focused a lot on the defense too. How would that have affected the offense? And also, too, knowing that Coach Williams and A&M sometimes do a lot of different looks. They don't just play straight man-to-man. They do try to, press you. They do try to trap. But the offense was just like it's been all year and just clicking on all cylinders, knocking down shots, 18 three-pointers again. And it's coming from a multitude of guys that makes it really, really hard for teams to be able to defend us. Because A&M came in as a team not great on the defensive side as it relates to KenPom. They were 62, I think, before the game started. But how they're built as far as toughness and defense. And we saw that toughness as far as the rebounding too, which I'll touch on in just a little bit. But just to come out and really from the start, just to take control of the game. You let you got Wade Taylor, who knocked down the three in the corner on a missed defensive assignment. But basically after that, you were in control and were just continuing stretching the lead out and getting on runs and getting stops at the appropriate time. I thought Coach Oates in his post-game made a really good point as it related to the offensive rebounding, that yes, A&M had 26 offensive rebounds, but they only got 21 second chance points off of those rebounds. And we kind of countered that with having 22 fast break points to their 4. So we took advantage that if they were going to send guys, all 5 guys to the glass to get rebounds, that when we did have it, we were going to get out and run and get in space. And I thought too, for probably the second or third game, not in a row, but just playing at LSU and playing at Georgia, where we did have times where we were getting out rebounded or the bigs were kind of taking advantage of us. Our guards were very active with their hands and creating turnovers and getting steals. I mean, Radford and Taylor between them had 8 of the 14 Texas A&M turnovers. So there's definitely things that need to be cleaned up on the rebounding side. There's a reason why A&M is number 1 in offensive rebounds. 1, they don't shoot the ball well, and 2, they know where it's going. So I can look at that and say, we had good first shot defense, but obviously you want to clean up the rebounding side of things. And just another thing that I've kind of been looking at as far as it relates to free throw shooting. Prior or after the game that we had against Georgia, you take our free throw attempts against our opponent's free throw attempts, and we were actually +3 against all of our SEC opponents up until that point. Now with these games against Mississippi State, of course, we know what happened against Auburn, and then another game against A&M where you get outshot from the free throw line in attempts. Teams have shot 131 free throws against us compared to our 75 in the last 4 games. And I don't think that's an officiating issue, because we've obviously shot the ball more from 3 recently. I think that's just something that we've got to continue to clean up on the defensive side of playing defense without fouling, even against teams that are more physical against us. And I guess not really more physical, but just have more physical play than what we typically go against.
Yeah, and you brought some.
There's
Sorry, go ahead, Charles.
Sorry, no, there's one more thing I forgot to mention. Kind of, after the LSU game, we talked about how, at least I talked about how impressed I was with the distribution of the ball across the court and the assists. Alabama had 20 assists in this game. So it was clearly something that didn't fall off after the LSU game. It was clearly something that they've been practicing, something they were working on. and something that if this trend continues is going to be very important for them, especially in weeks like we have this week. And I know I didn't mention him to begin when I first spoke, but shout out to Aaron Estrada, who really did a really impressive job. I mean, I think he led the team, I think, with 7 assists on the day. And of course, when you have those assists, you typically will limit your turnovers. He only had 2, which he typically has a couple more than that. So just really, really liked what I saw from him in the game. You know, he also had those 11 points. He'd had several missed opportunities there, but as long as he's able to distribute the ball like he did on Saturday, I really like the growth that I saw from him these past couple of games.
Yeah, and I'll make 2 points. One, Aaron Estrada has done a really good job as far as his ball distribution is concerned, and his facilitation. Um, One thing that's kind of going unnoticed, which it's not a problem when you have 4 guys that shoot over 40% from three. Aaron Estrada's 3-point shooting percentage is getting dangerously low. I think I don't have the stat in front of me, but I think he's like 2 points away from 2 points, like percentage points away from like Jaren Stevenson's 3-point shooting. So that it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, but it's one of those things that, like, when he steps up to the plate, maybe if some of the guys aren't shooting well in a tournament game, like he's going to be a guy that needs to make sure that, you know, his shot's falling. And then the second thing, and I think it's such a great point that you made, Charles, is A&M, for all of the success they had on the boards Saturday night, not a lot, but quite a few of those rebounds were just insane bounces that went directly to them, that there was like you couldn't, like, they were boxing out and somehow the ball rebound hits off the rim and it goes over our player and directly into the A&M's player's hands. I think that I saw that happen like 7 or 8 times, right? And I was talking to Andrew Parrish about this, who I was sitting with, and he said it's very clear that A&M specifically practices getting offensive rebounds, and they know exactly where the ball is going, exactly how it's going to bounce off. It's kind of like that Dennis Rodman video where he's like, "Oh, I know if it's going this way, it's going to come off like that." That's literally what it felt like
I
versus
was
A&M.
thinking the same thing.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a major cause of concern. Obviously, rebounding has been an issue in the past for Alabama. It's going to be an issue with the type of, not lack of physicality, but not the same type of intensity or physicality that you're going to get from like an A&M or a Tennessee or things like that, as well as the size. When you have Grant Nelson, that I think we brought in to play the 4, playing the 5, and you have guys like Rylan Griffin, or I know Sam Walters had 11 and 8, but he's not known as like this big physical body, right? It's bound to happen. So, moving from the A&M game, let's talk about the first of the 2 top 25 matchups that we have this weekend, which is the Florida Gators coming to Coleman Coliseum to face the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Yeah, so that's going to be on Wednesday. And before I get into the game, Wednesday is my mom's birthday. She's coming to the game with me. So anybody who sees me at the game, make sure to wish her a happy birthday, and I will go ahead and say an early happy birthday, Mom. As we get into playing Florida, a team that's really starting to hit their stride, we'll get through the KenPom numbers first. They're 9th in offense, 89th in defense, so similar to us, really good offense, struggles on defense, and their tempo is 34. So I expect this to be an up and down, probably similar to the LSU games that we've played, with maybe some, more offensive output from their side. They're led by Walton Clayton Jr., a transfer from Iona, who, as I was looking at his numbers and just kind of his story, he's from Lake Wales, Florida, and he's built very similar, in my opinion, to Mark Sears. So it's a guy who left the state, played at a mid-major, had success, coached by Rick Pitino at Iona, comes back home. I don't know if he grew up a Florida fan or not, but I imagine there's a lot of pride in playing for one of his, state schools, and is really leading the charge for them, in addition to Zion Pullen, who is another transfer from UC Riverside. who, interestingly enough, played against Latrell Wrightsell when Wrightsell was at Fullerton last year. And just to go ahead and put some good vibes out there, Latrell scored 22.5 points in those 2 games and was 6 of 10 from the 3-point line. So hopefully he can have some of those repeat type performances in our 2 games against Florida coming up. But he's Pullen's a 5th year. He's played this will be his 132nd game of college basketball on Wednesday. And that's not even the guy who's played the most college basketball for them. That's Tyrese Samuel, who's a transfer from Seton Hall. He's a 5th year guy, and this will be his 144th college basketball game. And then you still got Will Richard and Riley Kugel, who are in their second year in the Golden System at Florida. And those are 5 guys that all average double figures, really leading the team for them as far as it is for the Gators on the offensive side, and really, playing really good basketball right now. One of the things that stands out as not being good for Florida is they only shoot 69% from the free throw line, but they are a team that is second in free throw attempts in the SEC. And then also talking about rebounding, they're the first in SEC in rebounding and second in offensive rebounding as well. So it's a lot of things where just talking about, free throws and rebounding against A&M, that you have an opportunity to show improvement and try to clean those things up against a really good quality opponent. They're 8-4 in the SEC. They started 1-3. That one loss as they on this 7-1 run was to Texas A&M at Texas A&M, where they lost by 1 and had a 12-point lead in the second half. That's something about this team for Florida, whether they get up big or they get down big, all their games tend to be pretty close, whether they let the teams back in or they fight back to make it really competitive. The rest of their schedule is obviously our game Wednesday, but then they've got Vandy at home, Missouri at home. They go to South Carolina, who's struggling a little bit right now. We play them down there in Gainesville, and then they go to Vanderbilt. It's probably the easiest SEC schedule for any team the rest of the way. They've got to be sitting there looking at, we can insert ourselves into this SEC title race right now, especially with the win potentially Wednesday in Tuscaloosa. So obviously we need to have a great start, and I think that's going to be an interesting component of this game is Clayton Poole and Richard all start for them. Samuel starts for them. He's 6'10". And then it is Micah Hanlogton is a center for them. He's 7'1". So they're going to start a lot bigger than what we typically do if we stay with our lineup. And my hope is that we actually stay with the lineup that we've had and make them play to us instead of us playing to them. I'm reminded of that game 2 years ago at Missouri where we came out in zone with Bediako because we weren't sure how we were going to match up. We're the better team, in my opinion. We're at home. Let's force their hand. If we've got to make a change and bring Pringle in at some point, in the first 5 minutes, that's fine. But I'd like to see us force the issue and make them make the change by us knocking down shots, getting out and running, and putting some pressure on them. That may mean we give up some offensive boards. That may mean there's some mismatches for Samuel if Griffin's having to guard him. But try to do what's been successful for us and try to make them make the changes before we have to. But that's just kind of a quick overview as far as Florida and some of their analytic numbers.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Joey. I feel
no, go ahead. You're good. You're good.
I feel like a key thing that's going to be crucial for Alabama is preventing guys from getting into foul trouble. The tendency that Alabama has had this season is when they've gone up against bigger teams, their bigs have tended to get into foul trouble. We've seen less and less of Muhammad Wagi, and that might be I was talking again to Andrew Parrish about this while we were at the game, and it might be as simple as maybe they're just trying to limit his minutes as much as possible to get him as healthy as he can for the tournament. But this almost seems like a game where you're going to need at least Wagi to get out there and play because the bigs are bound to be in some foul trouble. And I don't think like a Sam Walters is going to do the type of job that they'll need to do against the type of size that Florida has.
No, and I was just gonna say, Charles y'all both kind of started talking about the length, so I won't go into that. But Tyrese Samuel, low key, might be one of the best two-way players in the SEC this year, and I think he's not really getting as much attention as he should. I mean, he's second in the conference right now in field goal percentage. I believe he's third in rebounds. So he's pounding the glass on one end. He's also doing really well. Let me see if I can have his numbers real quick. Yeah, he has 30 steals and 23 blocks on the year. As you said, he's 6'10". When you combine him with Micah, is it Hanlogton? Is that you say his last name? Who's their 7'1" guy? They really have a lot of length. So I think the bigs are probably what's going to be what decides this game, and kind of what you were saying, Christian, especially if our guys get in foul trouble too early on, then that could really be a recipe for disaster if it gets out of hand too quickly. So Florida's bigs have definitely won them a lot of games this year, and they're definitely going to be a crucial aspect heading into this game this week.
The games against Florida, I just remember, obviously, when Billy Donovan was there and they had the back-to-back national championships. But as far as being an Alabama basketball fan, I mean, we went from probably the 2007 season, the last time that we had some retro or throwback jerseys when they were celebrating the 75 years of SEC. That was the last time we had beaten Florida at home until Nate Oates got here and we played them at home in the COVID season. And he's only lost to Florida once since he's been the head coach at Alabama. And that was a game that should have won. I think we were up 20 plus points. And that was, one of those games where you're trying to build the culture and, shake some of the bad juju, I guess, out of as far as what the program had been, as far as having big leads and giving those up. But he's really done a number on Florida ever since he's gotten there. Since I haven't seen them we haven't seen us beat them a lot at home. It really been almost a decade plus since we'd beaten them at home. These games always get me very excited when Florida comes to town. One, because of their history, but two, just because it's something that we haven't had a lot of success. We've had more recent success, but even if you go back 5-10 years, it's been a series that Florida's dominated.
And now we're just going to switch gears a little bit. Let's go into this Kentucky game, this road game against number 17 Kentucky, where Alabama's not had much success at Rupp Arena. I think they've won once in Rupp Arena under Nate Oates. And it seems like Kentucky, obviously coming off a big win versus Auburn at Auburn, which I think that's the first team this season that's won in Neville Arena. Of course, we're going to get a Kentucky team that's hitting their stride right when we play them, leading to an inevitable, probably SEC tournament matchup, like always. Tale as old as time. Joey, what do you have for us on this Kentucky game?
This Kentucky team, much like Florida, is kind of similarly constructed to Alabama when it comes to their rankings in KenPom. I mean, they're 7th in the country in offensive efficiency. They're 82nd in defense. So, like our guy Kevin Sweeney was saying earlier during the interview, talking about how this could be a 110 to 105 game. It's going to be probably pretty high scoring. One thing that is interesting is they are 17th overall in tempo. That's in Alabama. Seems like it's been a while since they played a team that can kind of go toe to toe with them in tempo. So I think that's going to be a really interesting factor to kind of watch as this game progresses. As far as individual, guys that kind of stick out on their roster, Antonio Reeves obviously has done a phenomenal job for them. He's leading the team in points right now. He's also a really solid rebounder. He's third on the team in rebounds with 108 on the year, particularly on the defensive end of the court. He has 89 of those rebounds are on defense. So he's been a solid player for them all year long. When you're looking at just how they stack up against everyone else, he's also third just behind Mark Sears and Necht for Tennessee. He's third in the SEC in points per game. But then this team is pretty well distributed because, in rebounds, you have Trey Mitchell. He's fourth in the conference in rebounds. Then you have Reed Shepard, who's really good with his hands. He's top of the SEC right now in steals per game. But it's, going back to their roster, it's Kentucky, there's not a lot more you could really have to say. They have Trey Mitchell is a guy that could be potentially ready. Of course, he's been out with a shoulder injury. He missed the Auburn game. But this is a guy that, if he is able to play this weekend, will be very crucial. He's been really lights out for them when he hasn't been injured. You have Reed Shepard and Rob Dillingham, who obviously have also been huge contributors. DJ Wagner, just overall the guys that see the minutes. There's a reason they get a lot of minutes. This is a really, really well built roster, and hopefully, if Alabama is able to tackle Florida this Wednesday, you really kind of like it as a potential prep game, because these teams are eerily similar as far as what their strengths and weaknesses are. So hopefully there's not too much hangover from that. But that's kind of just the brief rundown. This is a really, really good Kentucky team. When you're looking at, their schedule right now, they're 8-4 in conference play. They still have a legitimate shot, just like Florida. Looking at the rest of, them the rest of the way, after they play LSU at LSU this weekend, or I'm sorry, this week. So that's potentially a game that you don't really want to see them lose, because the last thing you want to see them have is a reason to fight even harder coming into Saturday. But after Alabama, they didn't have to play at Mississippi State, and then they host Arkansas, host Vanderbilt, and then they close out the year with will probably be the game of the weekend to close out the year, Kentucky at Tennessee. So overall, just while there is that Tennessee game, they also, like Florida, have a relatively easy going of it those last 4 games. So this is a Kentucky team that, while they haven't been at the top of the conference so far, they really have a legitimate shot, because they're also continuing to get better and better week by week. We're starting to see things finally click for them, which, as we all know, right now is a dangerous time for other teams for that to happen, especially considering with the tournament coming in just a few weeks here.
Yeah, and I'll say this about the Kentucky team. They have the talent, right? When you face a Kentucky team, there's never going to be a lack of talent. It's just whether or not they can put it all together, and it seems kind of like Kentucky is trending towards putting it all together. Obviously, just at the right time to play Alabama, like I said previously. But it's one of those. They're one of those teams that, again, like Kevin said, this game could be like, I'm not joking, the over under could be like 190 points or something like that. Like something absurd like that. I am thankful though that Alabama has, like you said, this Florida game to kind of level set. Because they're both gonna be fast paced games. They both have the size over Alabama. And of course, naturally, I'll just say this just so we can get this out of the way. That Big Z, or I think that's what they call him, is obviously going to make 5 threes against us. So we're just going to go ahead and just get that out of the way. But for Alabama, if you come out of this week going 2-0, we already are in the driver's seat of the SEC, championship standings. But like, you're really putting it on strong for leading into that March 2nd game against Tennessee, which, if you come out of the week 2-0, even if you don't, if it's 1-1, you're likely to host College game day for the first time in the history of Alabama basketball. So
Let's not skip over that trap game that is Ole Miss, though.
Yeah, that one is a trap game. It absolutely is a trap game. But Charles, do you have any thoughts on Kentucky?
No, I think what you were just talking about, as far as if you go 2-0 this week, you're definitely playing yourself into the conversation of a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, and potentially a 1 seed. That would only probably heighten even more if you beat Tennessee at home and secure the SEC championship. But I think we'll all settle for a 2 or a 3 seed right now. Joe, I thought you kind of said it perfectly, as far as Kentucky is Kentucky. I mean, even though the last SEC title they have right now is from 2020, the regular season before everything got shut down, and Kentucky fans are going crazy and pulling their hair out watching, ourselves and Auburn and some of these other programs have success. Kentucky is the king of the SEC. Like, it just is what it is. So having an opportunity to always, it's a game that you always circle when you're playing Kentucky. Kristen, you just mentioned, as far as them putting it together, they've only had two guys all year that have played in every game. That's Antonio Reeves and Reed Shepherd. Everybody else has missed a game at some point. So they really even haven't had the opportunity to put it all together because one guy goes down, another guy gets hurt. I think you're just talking about Big Z. He had to get, I don't think it was an injury thing with him. I think he just had to get cleared from the NCAA. So, if Trey Mann plays, maybe it is an opportunity that they actually have everybody together and actually, can find some cohesion as far as what they're trying to do. But it is going to be a very high scoring game. There's a lot of talk right now from different pundits as far as has Kentucky kind of figured out the defensive side. I think we'll learn more about Kentucky's defense before our game with them playing against LSU. Obviously, we've seen what Will Baker can do, but Jordan Wright, Jalen Cook, some of those guys, LSU's a sneaky team to me, in my opinion, and I'm really interested to see where they're going to end up getting seated once you get into the SEC tournament. They could make a surprise semifinal run, in my opinion, but that's for another conversation. It's more of just, can Kentucky have another good defensive performance coming into our game at Rupp Arena? There was a lot of talk coming out of the Auburn game of how well they did against their guards. I mean, even in our games against Auburn, I think we always felt like our guard play was going to be better than guard play. The difference was going to be somebody like Janai Broom, and they've got somebody like on Yewu, I think, who's really kind of stepped up. He had 10 blocks against Ole Miss, I know. So that could affect, obviously, our ability to get to the rim, and we will need to be able to hit outside shots, but we do still need to find ways for guys to drive into the paint and kick back out too, like we always do. I'll say it again. Kentucky's Kentucky. It's a great opportunity to play a big blue blood program. And, Calipari's got to be hearing it. Calipari's got to be hearing all the comments about Nate Oates and the success that he's having. So he'd obviously love to get a win and keep them in the title race for the SEC and continuing to build their team. But I will use one of the quotes that he has continued to say. I like my team. I like my team at Alabama too. And I like what we've got built, and I like our opportunities, going up there. Of course, like, whoever can get some stops is going to win the game, but I like our chances against them up there. So it is going to be a fun week of basketball. It may be, some anxiousness at times in all these games, but it'll be a fun week for Alabama basketball, I do believe.
Yeah, and you talk about like going forward with kind of the schedule. You go 2-0 this week, like we said, it's great, but I think we'll kind of switch a little bit and go to kind of expectations. I feel like we should do this after every, we break down all of the weeks. You have 6 games left on the schedule, right? I think the goal is to protect home court, period. Like that's your goal. You should be undefeated and in the home court. That means you get wins over Florida, who's ranked. You get wins over Tennessee. You get wins over Arkansas. That's 3 wins right there. And I'm not saying that I expect us to beat Tennessee, but that should be the expectation. And I think Oates has so much as said that in his press conferences. If you can steal one on the road, you're 4-2, 14-4, which I think that's our Kim Pom projection for SEC. And you most likely win the SEC, if not have a share for the SEC with probably Tennessee. I think if you lose 2 or you lose 3, you go 3-3. I still don't think that's a bad season at all. I think going into the SEC play, I think our expectation was 12-6, 13-5. So anything besides that, that's positive. I don't think you go 12-6. But I'm not saying we're going to go 3-3, but I'm just saying, just looking at it from the grand scheme of things, I still even think 13-5, you're probably still a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. What do you guys think about the schedule the rest of the way?
Yeah, I think Alabama will handle Florida this week. I think it is going to be a really tough game. Don't get me wrong. But I think they will be able to pull it out. However, I do think that game at Florida in just a couple of weeks. I really, especially if Alabama is able to win this week, that game at Florida is going to be pretty feisty. I really think that Florida can pull that game off, especially in a hostile Gainesville environment. As far as picking out another loss, I think this team goes 4-2 over this final 6-game stretch. I think, like as I kind of joked earlier, but it wasn't really a joke. I think that game at Ole Miss is potentially a trap game, especially if you're able to go 2-0 this week and be riding that confidence high. This is an Ole Miss team that really can sneak up on you. Now, if they lose at Kentucky, then I honestly think their odds increase to beat Ole Miss just because they'll be a little bit more aware. But I think they go 4-2. I think it's a toss up as to what that other loss is between the Tennessee game, between Kentucky and between Ole Miss. But I think that game at Florida is definitely going to be probably what gives them the biggest issue in these final 6 games.
Yeah. So as we get in, just thinking about expectations for the rest of the year, I think 4-2 is very reasonable. Like you said, take care of home floor or home court and try to find to get at least one on the road. I look at it, except for Arkansas, all these teams that we're going to play, their offensive efficiency in KenPom is 40 or better. So I think it's more focused right now on, can our defense continue to improve, because it is going to get challenged these next couple of weeks. But we also don't play a defense that's better than 60 in KenPom, except for Tennessee, which of course we get at home and will be just a phenomenal atmosphere. So, if you go 4-2, which obviously includes a win against Tennessee, let's say Tennessee wins out the rest of the year as well, so they're also in that 14-4 spot as far as the standings, and you tie with them at first as far as sharing the SEC. You do hold a lot of tiebreakers potentially with Tennessee to get that number 1 seed in the SEC tournament. So that'll be really interesting how it plays out as far as where Auburn, Kentucky, South Carolina, if they can pull it together, and even Florida as well, as far as how that might shake out in the standings. But in all these games, I also can feel like I can make an argument where we come out and can win every single one of them. And you can also make the argument where we could be, 3-3 or 2-4. I don't think that'll happen, because I think this team is too locked in and has got great chemistry that they're not going to let a 2-4 slide happen. But I think, as y'all just mentioned, is just as far as expectations of what we thought the year would be at 12-6 or 13-5, to have the opportunity to be at 14-4 would just be fantastic for this team, and of course be a huge springboard into not only the SEC tournament but the NCAA tournament as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think we talked to Kevin about this a little bit, Joey. The job that Nate Oates has done this season is his best coaching job at Alabama, or since he's been at Alabama, and maybe his best coaching job, as a college basketball head coach. To lose the amount of players that he lost, both not only the Brandon Millers and Noah Clowney of the world, but like he said, the late additions of Charles Bediako leaving, Javon Quinterly also leaving, to be able to bring this roster to the level that it's at right now, which is far surpassing any expectations that I had for this team. As in addition to that, losing 3 assistants. Charles, I was talking to Chris about this, your brother, when we were out on Saturday, and when last year with the foreign tour that we had, they had an entire summer to practice together, to build this team chemistry. For this Alabama team, a lot of these guys, or not a lot, a few of these guys came in July. A lot of them had injuries. Wagee had injuries coming in. I think Jaron Stevenson had an injury. Grant Nelson got an injury in fall camp. Mo Diabate had an injury. Like, all of these guys had injuries. And so it's not unsurprising that the team kind of started out a little slow, especially with the level of competition that they were playing. And you're kind of seeing the team kind of hit its stride, play up to the level that frankly is maybe not similar to last year, because I do think last year's team is better than this team, but they're reaching the same type of heights that this team went on. They have an opportunity to win the SEC championship for the third time in 4 years. And it's just great to see the type of coaching job that Nate Oates has done this season with this Alabama team.
It's been a growth year for him. Making the changes that he did on the defensive side as it relates to the coaching staff as well. I don't know if that's something that he would have done in previous years, because he's got his ways, and his ways have obviously been successful. But I think making that change just shows how he's growing as a coach as well, and that obviously should make us very excited as far as Alabama basketball fans of the trajectory of this program as he continues to lead it.
Absolutely. And I'll say it just like Kevin said it, build the arena. That's all I got to say, just build the arena. I mean, I don't know what else the man needs to do. I really don't. But as far as schedule for next week, for the next week, obviously we'll have a post game following the Florida game. Have a post game following the Kentucky game, and super excited about our guest next week. We're gonna have Richard Hendricks, Alabama legend, current SEC Network employee, on the podcast next week to talk Alabama hoops, gearing up for the big matchup versus Tennessee the following week. But if you guys don't have anything else, I think we're good, and we'll talk again on Wednesday night, and roll tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. Happy birthday, Mom.